Welcome to another episode of the Everyday Expertise Podcast. I'm your host, Sharon Martin, and I hope that today's conversation will expand your knowledge. Today I welcome Sharon Martin to the show. Along with being my aunt, Sharon was also my high school English teacher and a co-teacher of mine for all 6 years that I taught. My homeroom was just down the hall from hers, and I enjoyed discussing everything from the political landscape to the latest educational concepts she had been researching. She spent a lot of time researching self-assessment, and in this conversation presents deep truths as well as practical tips for implementing self-assessment practices in the classroom. I hope that you will enjoy it and learn from her expertise. Welcome, Sharon, to Everyday Expertise. I'm really excited to spend the next hour talking with you and learning from you.
And it is excellent to be here and to chat.
Yeah. So tell me, what is your work, or what do you do currently?
Well, I am a classroom teacher. So right now I'm on vacation,
Nice.
which is a wonderful thing. And in addition to teaching in the classroom, I also serve on the administration team at our school. So that keeps me busy. Between those two, between the daily work and then thinking big picture and making plans, there's not really too many moments where I wonder what to do in the middle of that.
So what grades do you teach, or teach multiple grades?
Yes, so mostly within the high school of a Christian school, approximately 170 students within K to 12, and I teach primarily in the high school, but a little bit in the junior high. So, and English is where I spend most of my time, but it's Christian education. We teach whatever needs to be taught at the moment. So I move around a little bit.
Yeah, very good. So obviously we're recording this in 2020, which means that we're hopefully towards the tail end of dealing with COVID-19, but who knows what that's going to look like. So maybe just in a few sentences, can you briefly describe what that meant for you over the last few months of the school year, 2020?
Yes. How to put 2020 from March to June in a few sentences. It was an amazing learning curve for students and teachers. And so we had, just before March break, we discovered that the schools were all closing down and weren't going to be reopening for 2 weeks.
After March break, quote unquote 2 weeks. And no, I remember thinking at the time that it'll be 2 weeks and hopefully we'll be back up and running. But that was in hindsight.
No, I think in my mind 6 weeks was realistic.
You were thinking that long.
And then later I'm like, we'll be back by middle of May, and that just kept getting pushed out in the wonderful world that we live in. But so we had March break basically to plan and come up with our method, the way we were going to use. Thankfully, our high school was prepared to use Teams. They all had Microsoft Education accounts.
Right.
So with our high school, that's what we did, and that worked really quite well. I mean, the learning curve was steep for week 1. The teachers had to learn Teams. The students had to learn Teams.
So that meant like lecturing online?
So we did a wide variety of stuff, although I tended to do most of mine asynchronous rather than synchronous. So I would post assignments, post videos for them to watch, post readings for them to do, and then, give them assignments. So they didn't all have to be there at the same time? That's
Is that
right.
What you meant by asynchronous?
Yes. Yeah. So what it meant was redesigning assignments.
Right.
I've been teaching, this is 25 years of teaching for me.
This was your 25th?
This is my 25th year. So it was like year 1 all over again, because you couldn't use anything really that you had taught, because you couldn't teach it in the same way. So really rethinking every assignment, every activity. And then the marking was just never, ever ending, because it was the only way to really give them good feedback.
Right.
And so to engage with them, to make them feel like their work was important and it mattered.
Because you couldn't give that in-person feedback that you're used to giving?
That in-person feedback, or even more important, or where I save time, is that group feedback.
Ah, yes.
Right? Where you do an activity and then you look at it together as a group. And I don't look at everybody's paper, but for 3 months, I looked at every student's, almost every stitch of work they did.
Yeah.
Anyway, it just never ended.
Yeah, wow, I believe it. So you said that you've been teaching for 25 years. So how'd you get into it, or was it right out of school that you started teaching?
Yes. Don't do the math back, or you'll discover that I was very young when I started teaching, right? I mean, that's a good thing to say. What made me, how did I get into teaching? When people ask me that question, I hardly know how to answer it, because in many ways I feel like teaching kind of chose me, and that I hardly even really made that decision. It's not that I was forced into it by any means, but it really was something that other people saw in me, the talent and the potential for teaching, and the doors kind of opened and I walked through them. So that's kind of how I initially got into teaching.
People were telling you that you're going to make a good teacher someday?
Oh, very much so.
Okay.
From a very young age. And at a time I would have been resistant to that and said, no, I'm not going to teach, because that's what everyone thinks I'm going to do.
Right.
But that changed, and then they offered me jobs and I took them without any education and without any training. I mean, this is in a Christian school where a body in a classroom, I guess, is what you need. And it was even worse 25 years ago, I think.
Really? Okay.
So, I was young, very young, and had no experience and no teaching when I started teaching. But thankfully, I made some decisions to get some training after that.
The first few years you learned on the job, basically?
Very much so. I taught, the first few years I taught as I was taught. Like my teachers who had taught me in school were my education on how to teach.
Yep.
And then I started reading and figuring out, what kind of a teacher I wanted to be, and then went back to school.
Did you do any summer classes or courses or anything like that in those first few years?
So I think FB had just started offering their summer week. No, their summer term wasn't something that I would have been familiar with yet. But at some point in those first 7 years, I would have done a teacher's week at FB sometime. Yeah. And here locally, I think there were some. This goes back a few years, so it's really fuzzy. But I remember going to some local teachers.
Oh, okay. Week. Someone had organized an education event of some kind.
Yeah, it was probably like in the parochial schools.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. So you taught for a few years and then decided to go to school. Go back to school?
Yeah, it was 7.
Okay.
7 years. And then I decided to go back and get my bachelor's in English education and history education. And then taught again after that.
Yeah. So do you remember at all was there a certain catalyst that prompted that decision, or was it something you wanted you thought about throughout the years of teaching prior to going back to school?
Well, if we're being fully honest, when I started teaching, I didn't even have my high school diploma.
Okay.
So I first finished that while I was teaching.
Okay.
I worked part-time at finishing my high school diploma. And then once I had my high school diploma finished, then I knew that I wasn't done.
Okay.
That I was going to go back to school at that point. And it was at that point, it was either go to school and get the training and do it right, become a professional, or quit and do something else.
Interesting, because you were sick of it, or it just wasn't working?
Um, I don't I don't know that sick of it or wasn't working, that either of them really fits the description. I would say it was more that I needed to, if I was going to invest my life in this,
Mm-hmm.
I was going to give it everything I had.
Yeah.
And so I had to become as much of a professional as I could be. And for me, that really meant investing in education for myself personally before I am prepared to give back.
Yep.
And then also just about growing my own passion. Like there was I was passionate about it, but I was also scared of it because I was scared of what I couldn't do. Like there was a lot of ways that I felt really inadequate as a teacher because I knew that there was so much out there that I had to learn.
Right. Yeah. Very good. So you graduated with your bachelor's degree, went back to teaching school, and decided that you're never going to go back to school again? Or?
No, my professors when I was in the undergraduate program, my professors, I had a lot of encouragement to keep going already at that point.
Right after graduating.
And keep working on masters and even doctoral work at that point. I didn't have the money to keep going, unless, of course, I would have found, programs that would have paid me to go to school, but it's hard to do that in education. And some fields are better for that. Yeah. And I was ready to teach at that point.
Okay.
And they were really pushing me towards an angle of teaching teachers, even at that point.
Okay.
And at that point, that wasn't really what I was interested or ready for. So the idea of going back to school was certainly planted.
I see.
Already in my undergraduate. Did I pursue it then? No, it took me another 12 years probably.
Okay.
Till I started working on my master's.
Yeah. And so you did it part-time? Would that how you describe it?
Yes. My master's was a part-time program. I did it over 3 years, summers, and while I was teaching, online courses while I was teaching. So I had an online course in the spring, an online course in the fall, and then 2 summer courses for 3 consecutive years.
Okay. And are you glad you went back and did that?
Oh, absolutely.
That's great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. And how long ago did you finish that then?
3 years, 2 years, 3 years, 2.5 years.
Okay. Something like that. Yeah. Very good. What's something that's affected your teaching since you went back again after teaching for a number of years? Have you seen a significant change in your teaching the last few years since doing that and finishing it?
Yes. That my master's was another huge confidence booster for me in varying my styles of teaching. Yeah. My undergraduate was very much a teacher-directed education program. And there's a lot of things about teacher-directed learning that I am still a huge component of. But my graduate degree would have opened my eyes to a lot, well, not opened my eyes, but given me a comfort level with a lot more things that we might fall into what we might call student-directed learning.
Okay.
And so I would say that my teaching style is probably more diverse than it's ever been before. And the other way that it's affected my teaching is that I'm still teaching.
Yeah. Did it do similar things to what your bachelor's degree did?
Yeah, if I wouldn't have gone back, I would not have. I don't think I'd be teaching now. I don't think I would have made it to the 25-year point.
Fascinating. Oh, that's great. So yeah, we a little later on, I'd like to maybe get a little bit more into some of the things that you studied, and maybe especially the project that you did, and what you wrote and researched there. But since you are heavily involved in education here in Ontario and teaching at a Christian school, but still thinking about the things that we hear on the news, and how that's going to affect students here in Ontario. So we talked a little bit about what COVID-19 did to school for you in the past few months. Have you given much thought to what it's going to look like in come September? Are there questions? What's it going to look like?
So obviously the public schools still have a lot of questions about what it's going to look like, simply because they've been told, each of the boards have been told that they have to have 3 plans ready for September. So an in-school plan.
Like all students can be there?
Right.
Okay.
So all students in school, with obviously safety precautions in place. And then a completely online.
No students in
no
school.
students in school plan. And a hybrid plan that would allow for students to be there half the time, so that their class sizes are half the size. So basically that they're working with cohorts of 15.
They come in groups then?
And then come in groups,
Okay.
and have to basically stay in that group for the entire day.
Right.
So basically they would be coming either a week at a time, or 2 days 1 week and 3 days the next week.
Yep.
So that's a really, I feel really, that's a really hard place for administration and teachers in the public school to be right now, with that level of unknown.
Yeah.
And yet there's a certain amount of wisdom, I think, to having all 3 plans, because we really don't know where our numbers and health situations and so on are going to be.
I mean, it's looking okay now, but that
Exactly.
could change in a couple of months.
Exactly.
Or even in the middle of the school year again.
So there's a part of me that respects that kind of caution. But then there's from a working teacher administrator perspective, that's also just a complete nightmare.
Yeah.
The good news is that we do not fall as a private school under those restrictions. We have a letter from the province that basically says, you do your thing.
Okay.
You're a private school. We don't tell you what to do.
And this is all the time, or just you've gotten this?
No, just got this letter.
Okay. So if they could still mandate that you couldn't be open like they did in the spring?
Right, but they have to have a state of emergency
Right. Okay.
to do so. So
you have to come up with your own plan.
right.
Yeah.
But we're lucky enough that our class sizes, for the most part, aren't huge.
Right.
That we're basically working with the Sick Kids document as they put it out for their recommendations for schools opening in Ontario. And there's just a lot of practical reasonableness within that document. So we're planning to be there 24/7, not 24/7, but
full school hours.
full school hours,
Yeah.
full days.
The whole school there.
The whole school there every day is what we're planning for at this point. And if Waterloo Region stays anywhere close to what it is now, that shouldn't be a problem.
Right.
The only problem will come up if we as a school personally would have a breakout or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Well, you still have to do like physical distancing and.
So if you go by the Toronto Sick Kids document, then no. They say students shouldn't be asked to physical distance.
That makes a lot of sense.
They also say...
Can you imagine keeping a grade 1 student, 6 feet apart at all times?
Well, no. There's no... There's no way that really works for children if you watch them interact with each other and what healthy interaction is between children. It also doesn't work for sports at any level. So that Sick Kids document, I think, is really helpful if someone's looking for kind of a reasonable approach to where things work. Now, if you have a breakout in your school or in your community, then probably you're going to have to do a more stringent approach, or just close your schools down or something like that. But as long as there's not a breakout, as long as, you you have 2 cases a day in your entire region or less than that.
Yeah.
I don't think physical distancing is the right way to go in our schools for the fall, to be real honest, if I'm giving my opinion on the radio.
Yeah.
Or the podcast.
Is there anything else that seems really big a big change that you're planning to put into place, or is it going to feel for the most part like school as normal when September starts?
So there's a lot of decisions we have to make yet.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think that it's safe to say that it's going to feel pretty normal. But there are some changes that we may have to make for the short term. Things like, how much interaction do you have between your class, your different grades?
Oh, yeah.
So normally we would really encourage that, a lot of interaction between our different classrooms, and even plan activities and events that would get different grades interacting with each other. So we're going to have to make a decision about whether or not that's expedient for this year.
Yeah. Thinking about if there are ways to mitigate spread, if there would be anything, and makes sense. So if you've been following the news in Ontario, then they've been coming up with a few new announcements and things that are changing. So the first one affects high school students. So I hear this term de-streaming thrown around. So maybe start by telling us a little bit from what you understand. How does Ontario stream its high school students?
So streaming is a process basically of putting students on a track towards university or not towards university.
Okay. So it's not university and college? It's university and everyone else?
The everyone else would include the college group, because to get to university in the end, when you graduate from high school here in Ontario, you need 6 U level courses.
Right.
And those are 6 U level courses from grade 12. So you would think that streaming process just happens between grade 11 and 12, but it doesn't. Currently, as it stands, students are already choosing a path in grade 9 that takes them toward applied, which is away from the university level courses, because they're not going to have the prerequisites. If they take the applied level courses, they won't have the prerequisites by the time they get to grade 12 that they need to take the university level courses, or the academic stream, which takes you then towards the university level courses.
So, just what's so special about university, or what so maybe for someone that's not from Ontario and they hear the term university and college, it's maybe kind of synonymous. So we kind of view them a little differently here in Ontario.
And the lines here are even blurring in Ontario between our universities and colleges. But our colleges are starting to develop university tracks that need the U-level courses.
Okay.
So the difference here in Ontario between college and university is college tends to be more practical,
right?
And university tends to be more your theoretical.
Yeah.
You're in university right now, so you might want to explain that better than I did.
Yeah. So I would like any trades or anything along those lines. So if you want to get into even take some firefighting courses, or that's not really a trade, but if you want to get your carpentry license or your plumbing license or electrical license, those kinds of things would be college level courses. Most nursing would be through a college stream, though that's getting a little blurred as well. So it's almost different types of work. Like or the job you're going to is going to determine what, to some degree.
Except that there are lots of overlaps as well. You could do a business program in university, you could do a business program in college.
There's even maybe some types of engineering
you can
in
do,
both college
exactly.
and university.
So it's not real cut and dry, but the type of program you get is is somewhat different as far as
Right.
the university tends to be also more of a liberal arts education. So
Right.
most university programs will require you to take at least some courses in the liberal arts, or I think that's the case. Maybe it's not 100% true.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like, do you need an English program in your math degree? Do you need
Just-
any English courses?
I'm not actually taking a math degree, but yeah, just one English course.
Okay.
So for
But-
like a science degree.
Yeah.
But
Okay, science.
but
Sorry, my bad.
There is some, maybe a few requirements depending on the program you're doing, I guess. But yeah.
So versus a college program would be much more specifically.
Yeah.
Everything would be geared toward
So,
your end,
my
toward the
wife's-
end point of getting a job.
Yeah. So my wife's program, every course was laid out for. They even called some electives and then told them exactly which ones they had to take.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah, and even when like the degree that I'm working on right now, there's lots of electives within that. So I could take economics or history or something like that, which could work towards my degree. So
Right.
even though it's not required, but yeah, there are the options there. But anyway, students are kind of having to decide in grade 9 or before grade 9 what they're going to do, right?
Well, they're having to decide in grade 8 whether they're going to go into the applied stream or the academic stream. And so depends who they're talking to. At grade 8, they get told, well, no, this is like, go this way. It'll be easier,
Yeah. So the applied is thought of as an easy way through high school. The applied
Exactly.
stream,
If you don't feel like working your tail off, well, let's just go the easy route. And then the other thing that is happening here in Ontario is if you look at who gets pushed in each of the two directions, I think it's easy to say that there is a systemic racism problem in the streaming program.
I was listening to a call-in show about it today. 47% of Black and Indigenous students are in the applied stream, and it's less than 20% in non-Indigenous and Black students. So, and
that in itself is reason enough to rethink the program. But I think we need to rethink it. I mean, I'm glad they're rethinking it for everyone. One of the things, because we're a small private school, we don't have the resources to stream
right.
at
Everyone
grade
takes
9.
the same thing in grade 9. Yeah.
And it's actually a wonderful thing because they can get their feet wet. They can get established. And by grade 11, there's just a whole lot more likely that they know
Right.
what kind of a path they're headed toward, where their strengths and weaknesses are, not just whether they're actually feeling like working hard or not. And it's amazing how many students feel like working hard by the time they get to grade 11, once they see their future kind of playing out in front of them, that maybe wouldn't have felt like working hard when they're in grade 8 making these choices.
Yeah.
So taking the power away from even the responsibility away from students that young to make those kind of life-changing choices, I think is really, really good. Now, that does put responsibility on the teachers to create classes where both academic and applied students can thrive.
Right.
And so that requires some really, really hard work on the part of the teachers.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, some of it might come down to, like you said, just the expectation. So a student that might have gotten into the applied, they're suddenly getting more of an academic type teaching, and they might really thrive in that just would have never had the chance. So that'd be good. Do you see it changing how you do things at all at Countryside or affecting that?
At this point, no, because they're still just talking about it being a grade 9 issue.
So maybe you know the answer to this. When it's starting in math, I think in grade 9, starting next fall.
Right.
And are they planning to eventually take it out all the way through high school?
They have not answered that question yet.
Okay.
I don't think they know the answer to that question. So
Because it'll be interesting if a stream starts in grade 10 or grade 11 rather than in grade 9 or.
right.
But the later it is, probably the better.
Exactly.
Better that'll be. Yeah.
Exactly. Will it happen yet at some point? Yes, as long as the college-university divide exists. And at some point, I think it's probably a good idea to offer levels of difficulty for students in the work that they're doing.
Yeah. And the other thing is that there's nothing wrong with going to college in Ontario. Like I kind of get that sense that it's kind of looked down on compared to a university degree, but I don't think that there's anything wrong with planning to go to college and getting a college diploma or some kind of or finishing a program there. So
right, I agree with that completely, but I also don't think there's anything wrong with working as hard as you can in high school,
right,
so that your doors are open so that you can go both places.
Right, so you're not limiting yourself.
Versus having a mentality, I can just ease my way through high school, do it the easy way, and then I'll still be able to go to college. And I think you're just cheating yourself out of your own opportunities for growth, rather than working as hard as you can.
Yeah. That's good. Anything else you wanted to say on that, or?
No, I heard the head of the secondary school teachers union being interviewed the day after it was announced.
Okay.
And Harvey Bischoff, and in true, teachers union fashion, of course they are, scared of any new change that comes their way. Although this one was very interesting because it was framed within this context of systematic racism, and they actually can hardly open their mouths and talk against it, even though in the true spirit of Ontario Teachers Unions, everything that Lecce comes up with is horrible.
Very wrong, yes. So the other big news over the last few weeks or months, I'm not sure when this first came out, is that Ontario is updating the math curriculum in the elementary grades. So, do you have any thoughts on that, or on if that's a good thing or not?
So I think it's a good thing. Ontario students are going to be asked to learn their math facts once again, rather than just being taught how to figure out their math facts. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that students should be taught how to figure out their math facts. I think math should make sense. But I also think that there's a really, really strong argument for memorization of math facts and automating that process for students, because it's a myth that facts prevent understanding. And that's an educational myth that people will put out there, that if you have these facts memorized, that then you don't understand them. Well, no, you can do both at the same time.
Right.
So I think that's a really good part of it. I think the focus on practical math, as far as personal finance that they're working into it, is also really a great thing. And even the coding thing that they're bringing in, teaching kids coding. I mean, really what that is just teaching kids logical thinking.
Yeah.
And I think
that never hurts.
That never hurts.
Yeah.
So I think that's actually kind of some great little components that they have. But you may have looked at it more than I do. What are your thoughts about their changes? And you, as a math tutor, you've seen some of the problems with the math curriculum.
Yeah. So when I started doing a math tutoring job last fall, that's kind of where I very strongly started forming opinions on elementary math. Up till that point, I taught high school math, and so I saw the product of what I was getting, but didn't give it a lot of thought, and wasn't working in the public school either, so I didn't know what it was like from that side, and tutoring public school students, I would have seen more of that. But yeah, I became absolutely convinced that learning your multiplication tables, having them memorized and right there is so important in going higher into deeper concepts and things like that. And it was funny because at the same time as I was starting at that job, I was taking Calculus 3 at university, which the deeper you get into calculus, the more it's just solving and you're not doing any calculator work. You're just figuring out and solving problems and doing the math. And there are still always little multiplication calculations and division and adding and subtracting that you're doing that. And if you were punching every one in those into your calculator, you'd get so far behind. I realized in my one tutorial that something that I had just read recently was very true as a brain surgeon, that he realized very soon into his not his residency, but his medical school, that you have to get fast before you get good. And I realized that in my tutorials that I had to be fast or I was going to get far behind. And so having those math facts there, I would have never been able to do it if I didn't have them memorized, if I would have had to go to my calculator every time. So even going as far as getting to university, all these students that don't have that, I mean, probably the ones that are there probably did eventually memorize them. But if they didn't have that, that's just going to hold you back and going into really deep levels of math and understanding. But then a grade 6 student that doesn't have those math facts they're trying to do a more complex problem than just multiplication, and that just slows them down when we're stuck on that every single time, and we have to go through our silly little process of figuring out what 6 times 6 is, whether it's drawing a picture or the worst one. They teach this method of doubling to figure them out, which makes absolutely no sense. It's not multiplication, it's exponential growth, which is a concept that you should learn later on that most adults don't even get, as we've seen with COVID-19.
Good one.
So it makes no sense to me that would even be a method that's taught, but it's not just one teacher. I saw it in multiple students that were struggling, that were trying to double and were having so much trouble. Silly things like that can get taken out of the curriculum. I think that's great.
No, and there's that doubling is just one of a lot of, I would say, what looked to me like kind of silly ways of teaching math that we've been using here in Ontario.
No, something like that isn't silly. It's damaging. That's my opinion of it. So.
I do not disagree.
Yeah, there's things that are silly that don't really help, but when it's actually hurting, then that's where it becomes a big issue. So no, there's probably a lot of the things, real life connections. Yeah, it's great if some of the examples get updated to be able to picture them better and stuff, but it's not as important as I think some of the things like bringing multiplication, some of the algebra things and data things that I was seeing. I think it'll be good if they have a good base in that before getting into high school. So, yeah. Anything else you wanted to say there, or did that?
No, I kind of understand why teachers in Ontario feel like they're getting a lot thrown at them this year.
Yeah.
Because with not knowing what it looks like to go back into the classroom, and then having a new math curriculum tossed at them, I think I understand that it feels like they're getting a lot, but I also think that the math curriculum is highly overdue. So I'm glad it's coming, even if it feels like it's the wrong year. And I don't think Lecce really cares about the teachers think. I get the sense that after the last year that what the unions put him through, I think he's kind of happy to throw things at them, that he has the public's full support in things like de-streaming and a new math curriculum. And so he's just using it to stick it to them a little bit, because Lecce is a politician of the politician's politician.
Yes, the education minister in Ontario here. All right, well, why don't we switch gears a little bit and get into you sharing some of the things that you learned, especially from your studies, that your master's degree that you did. So I had the privilege of teaching just down the hall from you while you were doing those courses, and so I got to hear a little bit of what you were studying and trying out, and things like that. So I'm excited to hear what you have to share here in the next few minutes. So yeah, tell me a little bit, I guess, if you want to describe more than the big project that I'm referring to, or maybe that's not the right term I'm using for it. But yeah, I'll let you talk a little bit about that or other things that you learned during your studies.
So the final project was sort of a thesis, although it was a modified thesis. It had a huge research component, but it also had a workshop component. So it was all about developing a workshop to teach teachers about the topic that I was researching. And the topic that I chose to research was this idea of self-assessment or metacognition. I use
What
the
do you
term.
mean by metacognition?
So, metacognition is simply a term that refers to thinking about thinking. Cognition is thinking, and meta is whenever something goes in. So,
Right.
so metacognition is thinking about thinking, and really learning as a learner to take personal responsibility for my thinking. And personal responsibility for my learning. And so self-assessment is this idea of being able to think about my learning, to think about what I am comprehending, what I'm not comprehending, to be able to make accurate judgments about that to advance my learning further. So what took me down this road? Well, as I was doing a lot of my reading for my master's degree and other courses, I kept coming across this idea of thinking about assessment as learning and thinking about assessment for learning rather than just thinking about assessment of learning. So traditionally, when we've thought about assessment, we've traditionally used that word to refer to the end product. So checking at the end to see if we learned.
Like to see, another way of saying it maybe is what the student knows or has done.
Yes.
That kind of idea.
Or accomplished. Okay. So
Right, yeah.
so in its most basic form, thinking about assessment just as the test,
Right.
that
Yeah.
you take. And I really started thinking a lot more about assessment as being a part of the learning process. So formative assessment rather than just summative assessment. And then what happens if formative assessment is not being done by the teacher, but what happens if formative assessment is actually being done by the student? What if the student is able to do those checks along the way and being able to see if they themselves are learning as they go? And I was seeing my professors were using a lot of assessment processes like that with me, that I was forced to do a lot of evaluations. And I saw it being really helpful for me as a student and really growing my learning in leaps and bounds. And so I started just asking this question, does this work for elementary students? Does this work for secondary students? What does the research say about the ability for elementary and secondary students to do self-assessment well and for it to help their learning process?
So yeah, that'd be my first question. Like as you were thinking about this, you were obviously an adult with lots of experience. So what did you find? Does it work for high school students?
Yes, although there is good reason to be suspicious of the legitimacy of self-assessment, because everyone from Benjamin Franklin to Shakespeare to Solomon, had cautions about this thing. I mean, I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said, there are three things extremely hard: steal, a diamond, and to know oneself.
Yeah.
And Solomon says in Proverbs, most men will proclaim each his own goodness, but who can find a faithful man or someone who's able to give an accurate assessment of himself? And Shakespeare says in Hamlet, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man. So suggests that he also was kind of not sure about this ability of actually being able to know oneself. So the research says that it's really hard to be an accurate assessor of yourself.
Right.
And it's even harder when we know less about a topic. So the less we know about something, the more chance we have of being able to assess accurately what we know or what we don't know.
So would, by definition then, a student not be able to do that well because the whole reason that they're in the class is to learn something new, not?
Right. So then self-assessment becomes possible to do it well when you're taught to do it well.
Okay.
So this becomes really ironic because typically self-assessment is viewed as a student-directed kind of exercise. So this is in a classroom where the student is taking responsibility for his own learning, hence he's assessing himself. So self-assessment typically happens more in curriculum or teacher styles where students are doing more of that student-directed learning.
Right, yeah.
But this is ironic because, like many other things, assessment actually needs to be taught. People need to be able to people need to be taught how to assess themselves well. And so it actually is a teacher-directed learning exercise to bring students to the point where they can be accurate assessors of their own work.
Okay. So you see it as your job throughout the year. You're trying to build your students' ability to assess themselves well.
Yes. And in a lot of ways, you have to be really deliberate about working it into your lessons and your plans because your textbooks aren't doing it for you. You know, your curriculum guides to a degree, like if you're looking at Ontario curriculum actually does a pretty good job of pushing teachers in this direction of getting their students to be good self-assessors. But if you're looking at the average textbook, you know, that's not something that's going to pop off the page, is teaching your students how to learn to assess themselves well.
Yeah. So is there anything that you look for being able to assess whether a student is getting self-assessment? Like, are there certain things that start to develop in a student that shows that they're getting it?
Yes. So I'm an English teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the ways that I see it is when a student realizes that a first draft is not a perfect draft.
Oh, yeah.
Once they're able to look at their own work and see the problems with it, that tells me that they're getting good at self-assessment because they're able to look at a draft and say, oh, this is weak, this is weak. Here's a strong point, versus needing me to tell them where the weak areas are, where the strong areas are.
Yeah. So, and does that carry then to a lot of different assignments to be able to just say, hey, it's maybe not perfect the first time or is it bigger than just going back and saying, how could I make this better?
Well, I think it does carry over to a lot of different things. I think it even carries over to being able to ask yourself the question, do I understand a lesson as the teacher's teaching it? So, and being able to stop along the way and say, yes, I understand to this point, or no, I don't understand. And then being able to form the question that you need to ask so that you do understand. So I would say one of the keys of learning to become good at self-assessment is actually learning to ask good questions that you can figure out where your weak areas are and where your areas of strength are.
Right. Are there certain things that you as a teacher can do too to even within like a lecture or where you're teaching, that you can help to guide the students towards that good self-assessment, those good questions?
Yes, I think there are lots of things that you can do. And obviously it's going to vary from, teaching style to teaching style, the types of things you'll use. But um, when students do an exercise, what answers are they absolutely confident that they have the right answers? What answers are they not sure about? And what answers are they sure they got wrong? And just taking time to stop and think about their level of confidence in whether an answer is right or wrong.
So you have them do this?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I think is a really good self-assessment strategy.
Right. So can they just put a number beside the
Number, color.
Okay. Yeah.
So after you've done, a set of math problems, you pull out 3 colored pencil crayons and you go through and you color the ones green that you're confident you got right. You color the ones red that you're pretty sure you got wrong. And if you're, not sure, they get a yellow.
Okay. Yep.
And then you check your answers and see how close you were to knowing whether or not you had a good handle on the work as you went. So that's just a very simple strategy that I think does help students to start taking responsibility for their own learning.
And they're at least thinking about, do I get this?
Yes.
As they're doing it. And
exactly.
That probably is at least a first step in understanding a problem better.
But I mean, and the list just goes on and on. Like just having clear learning objectives that are stated for your students, I think helps them when they know the purpose of a lesson. Then they can think through whether or not they are understanding the purpose and can understand whether or not they've reached their goals. Student exemplars, having
like examples. Or
yes. So. And they don't all have to be perfect projects. You can show them an exemplar of a poor project. This is what a poorly done project or paper would look like. This or assignment. This is what an excellent assignment might look like. This is what a mediocre assignment might look like.
So you're actually providing them with assignments that have been done?
Now there's research that shows that doing too much of that can actually stifle students' imaginations.
Okay.
So you have to figure out the right time and the right place to show exemplars. And if you don't want to be that laid out specific for them, another good step is rubrics. Okay. Because rubrics gives you the criteria, which might even be more helpful than the exemplar in being able to see what they're looking for. So I think some of both is probably good for students to really learn to become good self-assessors. But I definitely use rubrics more than I use exemplars.
Okay.
And then with the rubrics, research also shows that peer assessment is one of the building blocks to good self-assessment. So students will be able to evaluate another person's work more honestly than they will be able to evaluate their own work, at least initially.
Okay.
So peer assessment can actually build those self-assessment skills into a student. So
you don't find that they're worried about what their friend will think of what they assessed on an assignment or something like that?
Mostly not. No, definitely not at a senior high school level.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit at a junior high level where they're more afraid of being critical.
Okay, yeah.
At a junior high level, I will sometimes have them work towards just at least being able to recognize what was done well in a student's project. So I might take responsibility for pointing out what was not done well and have the students point out something that was done well. So have them find the positives. But they have to be taught how to specifically look for good things.
Okay, yeah. So when you're doing a peer review session with your students, is the goal actually more for the students doing the reviewing than for what students are going to receive back from their peers?
Yes, although my students don't necessarily know that.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, for me, peer assessment is always to try to build better self-assessment skills.
Okay, yeah.
But I don't necessarily always frame it like that.
Yeah.
Because they understand that they're giving and taking from each other, and that's okay too. Like, I want them to learn from each other as well. Yeah. But that's not the end goal of my peer assessment.
The goal is that they can look at a paper they didn't write, and so therefore haven't invested in it, and then can find problems that they can apply back then to their own paper.
Exactly.
Yeah. You maybe touched on a couple of ways that younger students are different, but you do teach in junior high, some grade 7 and 8. So do you see your approach to self-assessment changing as you go down to younger students?
Yes, it does. Like the 3-color assignment that I talked about, that one works really well with junior high and could work with a lot younger students as well.
Right. Yeah. It's just colors.
The peer assessment has some success at, junior high levels, and I think it can if it's taught well, if they're prepared for it. But I have more success with that at older student levels. But I think metacognitive exercises, it's something you can start very, very early. I mean, it's just as simple as asking a child, "What did you learn today?"
Yeah.
Is really asking them to think about where their learning has progressed and where they've changed. And we've sometimes seen that as just a conversation filler. But I think it actually is a really important question. What did you learn today? And stopping and thinking about that is a device that any parent can use with a child to get them thinking about their learning.
I still have a memory from when I was in grade 2. Great grandma was babysitting us one time after school, and I remember her asking me what I learned at school that day, and all I could come up with was that I learned the sound that the letter U makes.
Well, that was a profitable day. At least you had something.
Exactly,
I kind of remember from my childhood that the answer nothing was kind of common. And I wonder if we're doing something wrong in our classrooms if our students are leaving and saying, "I didn't learn anything today."
Mm-hmm. But is it also like, should a parent or someone that's asking, should they push for an answer?
Probably. But if the teacher didn't have clear learning objectives and didn't actually make it clear to the students what they were learning that day, then maybe that day just felt like another day of doing another page of math facts.
Yeah, or they just did activities. They didn't learn anything.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that it does come back to teachers to really be thinking about what my objectives are today. What are my students learning today? Yeah.
No, it's great things to think about. We are running out of time. We just have a couple minutes left. Do you have maybe a point or two that you would give as advice to teachers, or things to think about maybe that in just a few minutes would prime some thinking or maybe a new idea for someone that's teaching or looking for ways to improve their teaching?
I think that, and I maybe hit on this already, but I think that as teachers, if we don't really invest personally in training and studying and developing, we're only going to be as good a teacher as what our teachers were. Yeah. And we won't even be as good as they were because we won't have caught everything that they did. Yep. And so I think it's really, really important that as educators, we prioritize our own education. We can learn a lot about how people learn, and we can become better at teaching people how to learn. And so cognition is something. It's a process of the brain that we can understand more about if we research. And so I think just becoming really passionate about learning how people learn and learning how to communicate well to different groups of people. I think that's really, really important as an educator.
Yeah. Do you have any resources or books or anything that you've found helpful that you'd know right off the top of your head for that idea of thinking about cognition and
Oh, wow. The list is long. If you want my list of resources, it's probably in the hundreds on that topic.
Well.
So I'm not exactly sure where to start with a simple, I'm not sure what's one book to say. I don't think I really found one book on this topic of self-assessment or metacognition. It tended to be a chapter in a book or a research article. Many, many, many research articles, but I really didn't find someone that wrote the book on self-assessment. If you're looking for books on formative assessment, there's lots of books on that, and most of those books will have a chapter on self-assessment.
Okay, yeah. Well, even with the whole cognition and metacognition thing, in my last couple years of teaching, I picked up a book by a math teacher that was giving what he had learned from years of teaching, and he had a section on cognition and it was really helpful for me because there was a lot of new ideas and things that I hadn't thought about, and it helped a lot more than just my math teaching to think about some of those things.
No, there are so many good resources out there for educators to read. You could spend a lifetime of summers reading good books that will help you become a better teacher.
Yeah. All right. Well, our hour is up. So unless you have something that you want to say yet in closing, I think we'll get ready to wrap it up. Anything you want to say?
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing with us. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And thank you, Sharon, for sharing your knowledge with us. It was really good to sit down with Sharon again and discuss education and teaching. I've definitely missed that. Though I'm not currently teaching, this conversation was a really good reminder of how self-assessment and metacognition can help me in my learning. I will need to listen to this episode again before heading back to school in the fall. So thank you, Sharon, for sharing with us. If you'd like to connect with the show, send me an email at contact@everydayexpertise.ca. You can also connect with us on social media, or if you visit the website, you'll find show notes for this particular episode, as well as other information about the show, and that can be found at everydayexpertise.ca. That's all for now. Join me again next week to learn from the expertise of everyday people.